As I see it, there are three main components that go into execution. Those three components are iteration, consistency, and environment. So we're actually going to start with environment today. The thing about environment is that yes, it is literally the space around you, but also it is people, the people that you spend the most time with, the kind of rhetoric that you are consuming most often. So with people, I would also say kind of content to a degree, and then internal landscape. And that is how you are thinking, how you are framing the work that is ahead of you. Okay, now I'm going to tell you a bit about organ donors and what that has to do with productivity, with taking consistent action. When I was studying decision processes at university, one of my favorite topics that we talked about was how defaults shape behavior. So the primary study that we looked at was all about organ donation and the percentages of organ donors in different countries. So in Sweden, the model for organ donation is that each citizen is automatically an organ donor and you have to opt out in order to not be an organ donor. 80 or above 80% of Swedish citizens are organ donors. Now, contrast that with in the US, you have to opt in to being an organ donor. So the default is that you're not, and then you have to register yourself as an organ donor. Statistically significant, lower percentage of people are organ donors in the US than compared to percentage of people who are organ donors in Sweden. So what we can learn from that is whatever the default is what tends to be carried out. We as creatures are drawn to the path of least resistance more often than not. Whatever is already put in place is going to shape the majority of people's behaviors. And this phenomenon holds true across several different areas. I bring up space, literal, like physical space, because if you look around your environment, if you look around the room that you're in, perhaps the toilet that you're on, you'll notice that the room is laid out in such a way where it is shaping your behavior. Let's take an example. Let's look at this stock footage room. I would say that this room is oriented towards socializing and reading primarily. So the way that the chairs are facing each other, that tells me that it's about connection, it's about talking to other people. Now, if there was a television where that picture is, I would assume that the furniture would be oriented towards that television so that it was easier to watch, which then would make watching television the primary behavior that the room is asking you to do. When you look around where you are, think about the little ways in which you can help yourself make your ideal behavior the default choice. So an example of how I use this is I've optimized my room to be a low stimulation area, because when I go into my room, what I want generally is to start winding down and falling asleep, or after I've woken up, I want to be very intentional about setting my frequency for the day, and then exiting my room is when I can then be like stimulated. I have a few rules that I follow. At night when I'm charging my phone, I actually charge it outside of my room because I know how quickly that would become the default thing that I do when I wake up. I don't think wholesale we should tell people not to be on their phones in the mornings, but I know for me, it makes my day worse. What I need you to think about is, what is this space cueing me to do? What is this room cueing me to do? And how could I set up the space to make my desired behavior the default? This question, another thing I want to bring up is, first of all, always, I want you to be creatively thinking about this. But for me, if I'm thinking about my digital space as well, if I'm thinking about how my phone is structured and what that is cueing me to do, one of the things that I used to do is at night, I would open my meditation app so that when I, in the morning, did look at my phone, the first thing that comes up is the meditation app, which would then prompt me to start meditating. And by the way, you can still ignore it, but it was always useful to have that trigger, that cue in which I was like, oh yes, this is something that I'd like to prioritize. All right, now let's talk about people. People's kind of hard because there are lots of people in my life that I love, for example, my parents, who I also feel like are not a solid environment for the work that I want to do. Something to consider with people, knowing who is a good space to bring which parts of yourself to. So entrepreneurially, I have a community that is actually not in person, but I also have people that I love who are just delights to hang out with. And that's okay. So I don't want to perpetuate this idea that like every single person you're around should be making you a more optimized person or increasing your performance. That's not it. Instead, I just want you to think more critically about who do you bring what to. The main question I would ask is, what aspects of myself feel good to bring to this person? And then if you feel like there are pieces of you that are not being held by any of the people available to you, that's when we think goodness for the internet, because there's definitely a community for whatever piece of you feel like is not being fed. So with internal landscape, we actually covered a lot of this in the previous video, helping to mold your inner rhetoric to make it easier for you to act on what you set. But another thing that I would add to the landscape is when you are feeling resistance, sit in that feeling and ask yourself, what is it actually about? Whatever the barrier that you feel like you're experiencing is, it's coming first out of the mind. Hello. So I straight up did not record an outro for that video because it was supposed to be smished into another video. So enjoy this blooper. You might notice it makes an acronym. Ooh. We just love an acronym when we can have one.